So we've got two major agenda items today. The first is presenting on co-teaching, which is a model that we've been rolling out in the middle high school to support both student services and case management, as well as really helping to work towards a more inclusionary model for teaching and learning. So that's the first presentation. And the second presentation is updates from the summertime presentation that we did in the middle high school about discipline information, sort of where we're at in the first trimester of the year, as well as our first quarter, pre-assessments for PSATs and SAS testing, which we did in October. So we'll do the co-teaching first, if that's okay.
Thank you, Mr. Dustin. Heather Shulman here, Assistant Principal of Teaching and Learning. And I have two teachers with me as guest speakers, Mrs. Kathy Pendergast and Mr. John Duggan. My co-presenter is Mrs. Jennifer Horn, Director of Special Student Services. Well, when does 1 + 1, when is it equal to more than 2? I can tell you, in the co-teaching situation, when learners have the good fortune to have 2 teachers in the room working together, co-assessing, co-planning, co-instructing, and there's deliberate, differentiated instruction occurring, the results are immeasurable. On this slide, you can see I've referenced some researchers and then just some statements about what co-teaching is. What it is not is sometimes even more important, because it is not a teacher and a paraprofessional helper, or a teacher and a volunteer assisting. It is 2 professional educators. Often one is a content area specialist and the other is a special educator. Other times it could be a different combination. Thank you. Want to talk about what we have this year?
So we have rolled some co-teaching or built some of our co-teaching within our district, and at the middle and high school, where we really try to focus this year, we have an access course, which is a course for for learners who struggle a little bit with being in a regular ed environment or a bigger classroom. And this year we have had the great privilege of having social studies co-taught in that area with Mr. Duggan and Ms. Pendergast. We also started the year co-teaching science with that course. And interestingly, we were able to merge with another science class. So in that instance, we actually have 2 science teachers co-teaching with a paraeducator at providing support in that area. So it's a very different outlook of what co-teaching is. And that has been a really valuable experience for everybody involved as well. We have an English course with a special education partner with a content area educator. Due to some fluctuations and needs this year, we've had to do some switching in that, but that was one of our co-teaching experiences that we started with. And we also have in our intensive learning center at the high school, we have 2 co-teachers, 2 special education teachers that are co-teaching. Sometimes they teach separately and sometimes they teach together as a co-teaching model.
So Mrs. Horn and I spent some time researching, planning, and we both individually have extensive experience as co-teachers. We have lived that role. So we were very familiar with what is needed to support the teachers as we developed their skills in this area. We worked together, provided our 3 cohorts with a full day of professional development workshop. And what we did is we delivered the instruction, the practice in this workshop based upon 6 different models of co-teaching. Sometimes I led and Jen supported, vice versa. We did small groups, we did large group, we did a variety of things to model in real time how 2 professionals could be used with their maximum potential. The feedback from the participants was, well, when's the next one? And also, I am frequently stopped in the hallway by other teachers, grades 6 through 12, and they want to know when their workshop is. There's a great and increasing desire. And because of your very positive experience, teachers want to work with their colleagues to meet the unique needs of our learners. Co-teaching provides for that.
Moving forward, where we're at and where we're going, we will be putting together a second workshop for our previous co-teachers, our participants, is our hope to strengthen and refine that. We are getting to the end of the semester. So we will also be providing workshop number 1 for our co-teachers who will be assigned for next semester. And we're looking forward to putting that together. We also are looking forward to providing some of this support and instruction to our JRMS co-teachers. At the middle school, our special educators are often in the classrooms and working alongside teachers, and we'd like to provide more training and build it to be more of the co-teaching model of truly 2 equal teachers in a space as opposed to a teacher and a helper. And that is really the crux of what co-teaching is 2 equal parity teachers within one space, sharing their expertise, sharing the workload, sharing the behavior management, and having that relationship to provide for students and to fulfill themselves.
As wonderful as it is, there are some challenges, some barriers to us being able to expand this professional development support and highest quality instruction to our learners. Of course, time. There are only 2 of us. We would like to have many of us, but we do as much as we can, and prioritizing this, of course. Thank you for approving the increased substitute pay. That should definitely interest more people to apply to be substitute teachers, which will greatly enable our ability to work with our teachers. We're having a hard time keeping up with the demands, which is a good problem to have. And as I said, right now we are kind of the site-based experts having done this, but we would like to have that shared leadership engage in that model where we will train the trainers. And that's when real learning can take place and it can grow exponentially. So we thought it would be wonderful for you to hear from 2 of our co-teachers, Mr. Duncan, High School Social Studies, and Ms. Pendergast, High School Special Education. And I must say that when we asked Mr. Duggan to be a social studies co-teacher with Ms. Pendergast, I think your reaction was a little like, I don't know what that is. I don't know how to do that.
Yeah, that's exactly.
He has survived very well, and they will share their experiences. Go ahead, guys.
You first?
You first, ladies first.
Yes.
It's been a pleasure to be able to share the classroom with John and to have that level of expertise in the content area flow through and to the kids that we're working with. And we're at a point where we've been working together for 12 years. So it was very comfortable to share that classroom together. And the kids could see camaraderie, teamwork that modeled for them. And I think that made it a natural flow for them to be able to work together as a team as well. So a lot of times I make jokes that it feels like we're mom and pop sitting around the kitchen table with the kids learning about new ideas and talking about the day's events. So there's an ebb and flow based on the knowledge and the area of certification that goes between the 2 of us. I get to jump in there and work on English, to work on the executive functioning skills with kids, to say, take a look at that before you pass it in. What else might you need to do here? And that certainly flows between both of us. It's not just John delivering US history in the 1890s. It's also, can you look at that sentence? Is that, what would you like to do with that a little bit differently? So there's that nice kind of camaraderie going back and forth and assist with clarifications and connections. We've been able to be very creative with this group, and this group has lots of questions that they ask us. Well, what happened in Jaffrey in the 1890s? Is that why we have a rail trail now? Railroads were here? Are you really like the connect? Yeah, really, they were here and they went from Peterborough all the way to Boston. No, can we walk the rail trail? And exactly that's what we were able to do. And from that evolved a learner-driven project called Jaffrey Then and Now, where we walked the rail trail and had experiential learning take place in our backyard. John was able to say, take a look at these stones in this barbed wire. Why do you think the barbed wire is there? Do you see any evidence of ties? Railroad ties? Over there used to be a bridge. And that bridge led to what is now 202. And that was called the Cary Farm Bridge. And then a walk up to the Cary Farm through the children's garden and looking at the evolution of that property over the years. And at one time it was a playground. There were slides, there was skiing. I would never have gone off of that jump, but it was a lot of fun. We had no idea that that winter playground existed there, along with Victory Gardens during World War II. The kids were able to put together what looked like would be a hiking guide, and we're hoping to get that published somehow, where our expertise for that. And that just beyond me. I lucky I could get the pictures on the page on the slide. And the kids were great at being able to, for once, use their phones while we were on a walk to record elevation, to record how many steps, how many feet we were walking, and taking that mobile device used primarily for social engagement and put it to what it's really supposed to be, a tool. Let's use our tools. Let's get this out. So we have a guide that has the elevation, how to start, how to walk, the tour, they know how to walk the tour and get from point A to B based on the knowledge that was shared on the first outing. And then a lot of research that we were able to do at the library and the Historical Society. And I'll turn that over to you.
The Historical Society, we had to arrange by special appointment, and they invited us as our group, and they were thrilled and overjoyed that we were there, and asked us to kind of become liaisons between the school and the Historical Society, which had been there in the past, but they have lost had lost contact. So they were thrilled. And the learners were amazing too. Like, they just charming, and that to see these people, these pillars of the Jaffrey history, just, it was almost like they had a sense of relief over them, that there was interest in they gifted us with an authentic, this is to the school, it's a picture of the CCC camp from their archive. Yeah, that was in Annette State Forest. Because that's going to be the third installment of the project, is we're covering the Great Depression, and so, and there's a lot more, but yeah, I just wanted to talk quickly about my experience too, coming to this from the teaching aspect. And the first thing is that you mentioned, everything was learner driven. Like, it just started with a question. And the comfort of working with another teacher, it made me feel, I don't know if it's up there, but confidence to take risks teaching. Because I don't know why, but it just felt, maybe because I would have someone to blame. But the co-teaching aspect of it too. And also for teaching for so long, teaching is really lonely. Like, I call it the lonely island. You think like you see 90 kids a day or whatever, but you could stagnate and you don't know the temperature of the water when you're in it. But when someone's there, it's like a check and balance to make sure that you're doing your best, like you keep each other on task. So, and that's an experience that I think is really critical to the. Coming away from this, I think everyone should do it. And I know as far as time and resources, you can have, for credit bearing classes, you can have, I think with 2 teachers across 2 different disciplines, you can have in the same amount of time, kids can get the same credits that they need. We had tried this years ago in a program called Nature, Nation, and Place. It was a study of place, and it was with a science teacher and a history teacher, but it never really took off because there was so much concern about like, well, we need to get this content and we need to get this and we have these needs. So it was like, it really wasn't co-teaching. It never, but now in the environment that you created here with progression learning and skill-based learning, it's the perfect time for it.
Really, to add an English teacher with a history teacher and have a 2-credit course, because you can teach English runs throughout the entire curriculum, through science, through everything. So that credit can be right and
Kathy
bolden
will be
into
like,
that.
We'll be doing this. And she's like, do you know what? I wish we could, because she has a progression. We just did this goal, which is an English, right? Like, why couldn't?
And so you two are the prime examples how we are bringing our instructional design, our learning goals to life. Learner driven, taking the custom standard that we have for our district and standards, talking to the kids, finding out what they're interested in, and matching it in real learning, local learning.
One thing that I'll just jump in and add as building principal, kind of watching this unfold and hearing the feedback from many different avenues, is the engagement of learning that's happening with learners within your group who sometimes have in the past really disengaged from learning in a traditional setting and struggled to find that where they then become passionate, engaged, inspired, whatever phrase you want to use. Watching them and hearing the discussions they're having, and they're asking questions, and the questions aren't what do I need to do to pass this, or do I have to do this, is it formative or summative? What's been consistently kind of observed is curiosity types of questions, like the ones you started off describing earlier. And we hear that from these learners when they're out of the classroom, but people who are coming in and then stepping out. I think at one point you had even said, I walked in there and was so blown away at the types of questions that the learners were asking, because it just isn't the type of experience they've had in more traditional classrooms. So there's that element of this too. You can see the spark because the 2 of you are able to collaborate, use our learning goals, and kind of be creative with how you've approached meeting the needs of each of these learners. It's pretty remarkable to watch. And the rigor level is much higher than it would have been in a more traditional setting, trying to support these learners getting that spark of engagement as well.
Thank you.
The connections that these learners are making to the curriculum, World War II, World War I can be it's so far away, but because of the way that you're able to connect, they're connecting, and it's becoming real to them. And it's just one of my favorite things that, having spoken with both of you, one of my very favorite things I think I've ever heard when I asked, is this something that you would do again? And the response was, this is more like a hobby. This is, and when we all went into education, we had this ideal of what that would be. And I see the joy when I go into this room that is that ideal of what education can be. So this is the utopia idea of there's clearly a relationship, and there was a previous relationship, and a depth of knowledge on both ends that is a big piece of the success, and a piece that we continue to try to figure out how we're going to build this, knowing that there has to be a depth of understanding, a depth of knowledge on both ends, and a collaborative piece for it to be successful. But when it is successful, it's really, really fun to watch.
So thank you for taking a risk.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks.
It's been a good time. It's also fun when somebody comes in, knocks on the door. Can I have lunch in here? Because that's when the class meets, and then they join us at the table. Oh,
That's awesome. Excellent.
it's like, come on in.
Yeah.
Would you like some noodles?
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.
Did you have any questions for them?
Oh,
Yes.
No,
Oh,
I'm good. The school I went to, third grade, we had a co-teaching classroom, and it was the only true co-teaching classroom that our school had, and my school was K through 8th, all in one building. And looking back, that was my like favorite year, because yes, we were in a classroom with 40 kids instead of 30 or 20, but there were always two adults. They mixed it up who was teaching what, and it was just streamlined through the day that we just had two teachers in the same classroom. And that class growing up was always my favorite grade to remember, because it just worked so much better than all the other classrooms.
Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. We will have a copy of the
Yes.
manual. We're gonna bring it to the Historical Society in the library where it can be
Awesome.
handed out.
Something you didn't share, but they gave your students a lifetime membership.
Yes.
That's true.
And
the Historical Society, and the students liked it.
Yeah.
What was really cool is the students going through the Historical Society actually found their family members listed on different plaques.
Wow.
And different places, and realized that their roots are deep in Jaffrey and Rindge, and that made it all the more personal for them. So
Awesome.
it was a treasure chest for sure.
Yeah.
Thank you all.
Thank
you.
you.
Well, our second presentation will be nearly as fun. Data, woohoo. But I do think it's important to be able to update regularly with sort of where we're at and things like that. So the first thing that I wanted to kind of start with was just reminding, based on where we were last year, what our instructional priorities were coming into this school year. There we go. So there's 4 things that we've really been spending a lot of time with our teachers focusing on in their teacher teams as well as individually. One has been the consistent look at our level 3 and 4 assessments, which are our proficiency at level 3 and sort of that mastery beyond proficiency at level 4, and looking at the cognitive expectations of those. What are the supporting sort of can-do statements that lead to those, and making sure that those reach to truly level 3 or 4 types of learning. So a lot of our work has been on looking at that avenue. All of our teams have been clarifying their learning progressions and crafting can-do statements. And these are simple language kind of statements that learners, parents, and teachers can use at each level of learning to know when a learner is ready to progress to that next stage of learning. We've put a big amount of our focus on aligning our grading system and our reporting system more closely with the standards that we're tracking to give accurate and real-time sort of reflection of where learners are at in the process of their learning. And the last thing has been our PLC is meeting consistently to analyze data and then plan based on what the data is telling them they need. So that's just a quick reminder of kind of how we came into this year based on last year's data. So this is our 11th grade group now, the class of 2024. The yellow bar graph in each instance indicates last fall's PSAT scores. The gray bar indicates the springtime's PSAT scores, and the sort of brownish red bar indicates this fall. So what you can see here is that in the total score, there has been a steady increase. 902 a year ago, 934 is the mean score now. Interestingly, there's even though this was a pre-assessment for this year, meaning only about 3 weeks of instruction had taken place, there is a slight uptick, which is great news. That means we didn't have a large loss of learning, and the durability of what learners took out of last year kind of carried into this fall. And that translates into our evidence-based reading and writing scores, which is the middle set of graphs. You can see a steady uptick and about a 4-point increase even from last spring by the time we assessed in October of this year. And then the mean math scores went up quite substantially between their freshman, when they were sophomores last fall to where they are now. Stagnant between last spring and the fall, which again is great news. We don't expect to see growth with no instruction happening, but that there was no decay or decline is very good to see. So the pre-assessment kind of affirmed that we had some really durable, good growth in their skills coming into this 11th grade year. Moving on to our 10th grade group. Again, you can see a pretty consistent increase in their overall score. They actually went up 10 points on average between last spring and this fall. And evidence-based reading writing maintained, went up just 2 points, which is very tiny. Their math scores jumped 7 points, which is, again, great news with very little instruction between the start of the year and now. Not only was there no decline in learning in 10th grade, but actually some improvements coming into the pre-assessment for this school year. And then our transitioning into high school group, 9th grade, this is the group that we have I guess the weakest coming into the year results, but still nothing bad. Our mean score dropped 1 point from the spring to the fall. That's fine. That's to be expected. Evidence-based reading and writing dropped 1 point, and math maintained exactly where it was in the spring. So the takeaway for the high school assessments this year is that what we did last year and focused on with how we taught, instructed, and how learners kind of went into the summertime is that it was really durable types of skills that they built up. And our teachers are not teaching to any test. However, this is showing that the work they're doing is having an impact to help learners come into this year successfully. So that's great news. And we have a good foundation for this year of data to work from. Then we took a look at SAS, which is what we use for middle school grade 6 and 7 pre-assessments for the year. Grade 8 uses a PSAT 8-9 in the fall, but it's the first time they can do that test. So unfortunately, we don't have any data to share with them to show comparison. But looking at SAS testing, this is just the overall ELA and math scores. And so the yellow bar in each instance is the spring of last year. The gray bar is the fall of this year. So if you look at grade 6 ELA, we had a decline of about 8 points from when they were in 5th grade to when they've entered the middle school now. A little bit of learning loss there, but again, nothing that's shocking given the transition from 5th grade into middle school. Math from 5th grade to now, to the pre-assessment this year for grade 6 showed a very tiny bump of 2 points. Again, great news. We're starting off with the ability to really build on that. Grade 7 ELA last spring as 6th graders, they scored 647 points on average. This year, there was a drop to 623 points. And math, they scored 494 in the spring. This fall, they're at 506 points. So a slight dip in ELA, a slight jump in math. One thing that should be noted before we look at the proficiency bars and things like that, with our interim assessments this fall, there were some factors that have definitely impacted our scores. One being that with the default budget happening this year, there was no Chromebook replacement for grades 6 and 9. And those devices, unfortunately, we found out the day of our testing, were not compatible with the state secure browser because they're no longer, they're past their serviceable life from Google. So that created a huge disruption for the 6th and 7th graders because we had to borrow devices from working devices and pass them around. And so that's something to note. We also only ended up being able to test about 60 7th graders and about 60 6th graders. So we're missing about a third of each grade level, which would impact how the numbers might show as well. So that being said, we're starting in a decent spot, but I just wanted to make that caveat that there is a portion of learners who we're currently missing. This is just another way to look at the data that looks at the proficiency levels. We can see this is grade 6. Anything that's green or blue means that they're proficient or above. The yellow bars mean that they're in that approaching zone, and the red is below where they should be. And what this measures is the actual benchmarks for the grade level, not necessarily the fact that this is fall of the grade level. So what this is telling us is that the 5th graders entered into 6th grade with about 55% of them proficient or above. And now measured in 6th grade, their percentage of proficiency, if they took the summative assessment right now, 24% of the learners would be considered proficient. So that looks like we've dropped quite a bit in proficiency, but not really, because again, this is the beginning of the year. So it's just interesting to look at. 6th grade math, similar thing. We see a drop in the proficiency levels. That orange bar stays pretty consistent, which is good. But overall, this isn't telling us much, except that we have guaranteed right now about 15% of kids in the spring should be proficient. we're hoping to obviously build quite a bit on that as the year goes on. And then grade 7, 2 sets of the same data. This is ELA and this is math. So, what we kind of take away from this data at this point is that we, how we started and moved in through last year did have some good impacts on the durability of skills. And it also reinforces the importance of doing the PLC work that we're doing. So in the next slide, I just kind of outlined where we're going next. This is just an example of what some of our PLCs have already been doing with the data they have. As you drill into the SAS scores, as well as the PSAT evidence-based reading and writing scores, there's a consistent weakness in how learners are using evidence in their writing. So pretty much across all of our grade spans, our various professional learning communities have been using that as a goal in designing specific instruction across content areas. For example, in the high school, our science team has put on their walls, I forgot the acronym that they use, but essentially thinking about a claim, what the evidence is to support it and how you reach a conclusion. And they're using the same language and some of the same processes as the English team are doing. So those are some overlaps based on that one. The science teams and both schools have seen a weakness in not the creation of graphs, but then being able to use what's in those graphs that came through in both the math assessments and science. So our PLCs have started integrating that in with some scientific writing, both in the middle level and the high school. Interestingly, the identification of main details from texts starts off really strong in 5th grade, but kind of craters, and that's been a pattern that they noticed in the data. What the teams are thinking is that because they're so strong in 6th grade, we don't ever come back and do some specific instruction there, and it kind of goes down. So the teams have been designing some common tools that they can use to monitor that particular area and provide interventions. And then with grade 6, because that transition is always jarring for learners, this year we built a specific 6th grade response to instruction period that they've already used the data to split learners into some ELA and math support groups. And for learners who are at level 4 in both, they have an extension group where they're pushing on to some more complex goals. I was at their PLC this week where they were doing some of that work to prepare for that. So the data supports this continuing, and our teams are definitely digging in and going with that. I'm going to turn over the next chunk, at least these first couple slides, to our assistant principal for safety and learner support, Rachel Summey, and our director of school counseling, Kim Baker, to talk about some of the things as we shift into the discipline and learner support focus of our data.
I'll jump in and begin, and we can actually go to the next slide. We'll be talking about everything you're seeing on that slide just a minute ago. So we spent a lot of time last year as we came back from COVID and had learners with us full time, kind of in the classrooms, looking at data, where are our gaps? When I say that, it's not just about academics, right? It's about social emotional learning. It's that MTSS-B work that I know you've heard some presentations from David Frazier. That work is continuing here at the middle school and high school as it is at the elementary schools, but really digging in and seeing what is it that our learners need? How can we help them be successful, not just in the classroom, but in the larger school community, and then in the larger community outside? And how do we engage our community partners and our families in those conversations? So we started by bringing a new class on board for our 7th graders, Skills for Success. We looked a lot at discipline, attendance, grades, work habits, and really looked at where the gaps were. What do our learners need to be successful in the classroom with each other in the school building? And that class really focuses on, there's some social emotional learning using Second Step. Second Step is also a program that's used at the elementary level. So the school counselor who works with 6th and 7th grade did some outreach to the elementary school counselors to kind of find out where they left off so we could build that. And I think you'll see that continue. So that becomes more of a elementary, middle school program. And also that opened up a lot of conversation with the elementary school. What are they seeing? How can we support? What will the transition look like? How can we make that more successful? And so there's a lot of dialogue that started there. And I think you'll see that continue for the rest of the school year. We also are using the program that is sponsored by CVS. Many years ago now, CVS went tobacco free, and in that they published a program called Catch My Breath, and that's all about education and awareness. So we're bringing some of that in to 7th grade to focus on some of that healthy decision making, those types of things. So that's happening in seventh grade. So the seventh grade school counselor, Mackenzie Rokes, will actually see every seventh grader this year. So not only does it have the benefit to the social emotional learning program that she's bringing, but also she's getting to know those learners. She's building those relationships. She's bridging that gap between the classroom, the school counseling center, and that's been really, really successful. So we're really looking forward to continuing with that program, kind of doing some evaluation now. What else does that program need? When our learners leave that program, how do we continue to support that? And I think also what we're seeing is the transition block that Mr. Dustin mentioned earlier about the academics. There's also conversation about how we can bring that second step and some of this programming into sixth grade transition class. So when they get to seventh grade, they've kind of already started that work. A big push in looking at multiple multi-tiered systems of support is really looking at that tier one, which is whole school programming. And that's been a big focus of ours. I know that if you're looking at the Bird's Nest, you see us highlighting some of that work. In October and November, we've brought in programs like Red Ribbon Week, mental health awareness, suicide awareness. We just wrapped up last week a whole piece on kindness, language matters, positive messaging, and just trying to get out there and be in the whole school. And when I talk about that, it's every learner gets exposure to that. So that messaging, that program is happening in our cafeteria, in the lunchroom, in the hallways, in the bathrooms, positive messaging, just changing kind of how we message to one another, how we talk to one another, where learners can find that. So there's a lot of that going on. That will continue. There are national social emotional themes for each month. And so we'll continue to see that work throughout the whole school year. Small groups. So we know that a lot happens at tier one where there's every learner is exposed, like every seventh grader gets skills for success. Every learner in the school gets some of the things that I just talked about. But then we also identify that some learners at that tier two need something additional. And so we've been doing small groups. A lot of them happen during lunchtime, and they can have a wide range of topics. We look for areas where maybe we're seeing that a lot of learners are struggling with friendship, peer interactions, things like that. So we're working a lot with Rachel Summey around what is she seeing. We meet as an administrative group and talk about learner needs. We meet as a school counseling team. We have a PLC that looks at that. And so then we'll determine what groups we're going to run, how long we're going to run them for, who's going to be invited into those groups. And so we're seeing more and more of that as we get into the school year. Classroom guidance is something that we'll see more of after the first of the year. We did a lot of this last year based on kind of what we were seeing in our building. And so this is an opportunity. We'll spend some time in 8th grade doing some second steps, some social emotional learning, probably still around relationships, social media, some of those bigger topics that we every year want to make sure we're touching on, using some of the catch my breath things for 8th grade, and then certainly the transition from 8th grade to 9th grade will be a big focus for us. We are spending time rebuilding our community partnerships. With COVID, people weren't able to come into the building. And so now we've had this opportunity to rebuild some of those partnerships. So Reality Chat has been in our building partnering with us, and I have some some evening events that we're putting together that you'll learn more about in the spring. But they've been in the classrooms, they've been in the cafeterias, they've provided us with messaging to share. So they've been a great partner, and we look forward to continuing that partnership. We also, River Center will be working with us after the first of the year to run a little small group around skills. So learners will have the opportunity to participate in that program. And so we're excited to bring that back. I think that's a partnership that was really strong before COVID, and now we'll build that back up. So we're really excited to partner with them. We did a lot of changes to our grade and building wide learner support. So we know that our middle school teachers have an opportunity for academic teachers to get together once a week during their common team time to talk about learner concerns, ways that we can support learners. And so what we found is that's more challenging at the high school level because teachers have mixed grades.
Mhm.
It's not, all teachers don't teach ninth grade or 10th grade or 11th grade. So we built in a high school grade level learner support meeting that happens once a month. And I pause a little bit with that because it happens formally once a month, but from bringing that in as something that we do one Tuesday a month, what we're finding is then we're having finding these other pockets of time to meet as groups and have these really great conversations about how we can support our learners, how we can better communicate with our parents, how we become better partners. And so what that has done is actually decrease the number of times we need to have our building-wide learner support, which our building-wide brings in other resources from special education, it brings in teachers, it brings in our 504 coordinator, our student adjustment counselor, but we need less of those because we're responding in different ways. We're using interventions that are immediately available and we're seeing that success. We're partnering in different ways. And that happens also because we're providing more teacher education, more awareness about how we as a counseling team can support learners, how we can support teachers, how we can support families. So I think that oftentimes as a school counseling team, we're just doing the work, but we're not good at, like, we need to advertise. This is what we have available. This is what's going on. This is how we can support you. And the more we do that for teachers, and actually it should say for families too, the stronger, the better partnerships and the more supports we can offer to our learners. And then I talked about this a little while ago. We use a variety of data points to just inform the work that we're doing. So it's not just about, hey, we think we need to do this group, or we think we need to do this whole school programming. We're actually spending time looking at educator handbook. Attendance is a big piece for us. Work habits, grades, looking at all those things and then determining what program we need. And I think, I don't want to speak for Mrs. Lummy, but I think a big piece of the success that we're having this year is the continued collaboration and communication that the school counseling team it has with the administrative team to make sure that we're focused on learners and supporting them. So I'll turn this over.
Yeah, so kind of as a result of all of these pieces, we've coming into this past school year, we had, as we reported over the summer, a pretty jarring year of everybody back in the building full time, lots of learners coming back into full-time learning who hadn't been in the building. Our population of in-person full-time went from 450 last year to just under 700. So quite a bit of change last year, and we had a very heavy load of learners needing support, about 1,500 behavior incidents that rose to the level of administrative intervention and things like that. So what we've done for this first trimester kind of capturing of this is pull some key points of data from our discipline referrals for the year, kind of to show where our efforts have focused and where there's been some success. So we did strip out of any numbers, any attendance related concerns. Those are not the same as behavior referrals, although I will say that with our processes this year, I'm sure those would show a similar decline. But just looking at behavior that affects the climate for learning, looking at September 2021, so on all these graphs, the same color means the same month, but 2 different years, and the column on the right is always this year. So if we look at September, which is the gray bars, total incidents reported to administration for follow-up, 100 even last year, 107 this year. That looks like an increase, and technically it is. However, last year we did have 1 week less in September because of the flooding that took place. So that obviously would impact the data slightly there. So we'll call September basically a wash, pun intended. October of last year, you can see 196 incidents referred for administrative follow-up. This year, that number dropped to 123 incidents requiring administrative follow-up. And in November was 116 last year. That dropped to 91 this year. So then the next view kind of digs into that a little bit more, because that decline is what we want to see in total incidents, but of course the types of incidents matter. So if we look at disruption of incidents, September of last year, we had the first column. I don't know why my numbers didn't show up here. But you can see a slight dip in September in the incidences of disruption. That's the the yellow bar on the outside. The center kind of dark red bar. You can see October of last year was over 50 incidences of disruptive behavior. That number dropped to less than half. I believe it was literally half as much this year at 26 incidents of disruption. And then in November, you can see that it was about 15 last year and dropped to just over 10 this year. So the pretty substantial declines, especially in October and November. Defiance peaked up just a little bit in September of this year, but then the next 2 months again was roughly half or just over half as many incidents this year as last year. Peer conflict showed declines each month this year of roughly 50% difference, just under 10 last September, about 5 this September, just under 20 last October, about 9 this October, and about 12 last November, about 6 this November. So pretty steep declines in some of those peer sort of interactions and how to behave in classroom things. Unfortunately, our incidences of drug or alcohol involvement stayed consistent at 3. It's literally 3 across the board this year. And that was similar to what we had last year. Disrespect as a category is one that's a little bit vexing. It's the only one that showed a meaningful increase. So you can see last September, about 11 instances of disrespect reported towards teachers or staff. That jumped to about 24 instances this September. Similar jump in October from about 8 up to about 21. And then it stayed pretty steady in that low 20 range for November. And then weapons, again, declines from 1 instance last September, 0 this September, 1 instance last October, 0 this October, 4 instances last November, 1 instance this November. So in these major categories, almost universally, we've declined substantially in how these behaviors have taken place and repeated from one instance to the next. And that would be a consistent pattern. I didn't pull in here profanity, which, again, showed a decline. It would start to get very long to do all of those areas, but this shows the general pattern that we're seeing. So we have definitely seen success from the moves that we did, resulting from some of the patterns we saw coming into from last year. I did want to ask Rachel to talk a little bit about some of the support that you've been doing inside the discipline process itself with learners. I think that's important to note how you and Carrie Drew have really focused on some of those efforts.
Yeah, I think that one of the key components of we've had students being a little bit more successful with peer conflicts is the partnership with our school counselors and being able to, sit down and have conversations and try to work through problems as opposed to just pulling them out. And I think the added advantage of having, the counselor specifically for 6th grade has really been able to, to dive down deeply with very specific instances as they come up, and she can talk about those pieces in class. And then at the same time, she can bring forward some, about some maybe concerns that we can give extra support in the counseling and also with myself. And we're definitely seeing with the middle school kids, they are able to have some of those additional tools that I think they had lost during COVID. And as the kids have gotten more comfortable, they themselves have, I think, also gained some tools and started to kind of figure out what's best way to, if someone's being mean to me, what are some alternatives? And I think we've seen a decline with disrespect, especially with our middle schoolers, with the larger items and like the cafeteria and areas where there's maybe a little bit more, I guess, less structured. So I think it's been a huge difference with kids that I've seen with growth that I might have seen last year quite a bit. And this year, very little. And it's been great to see that growth. And I think a lot of that has to do with its maturity, but also the wraparounds that we have with the kids and also the teachers. The teams that are working, there can be an issue that's maybe kind of more 6th grade-ish, and the 6th grade team, when they're getting together where their meetings, they can collaborate and they can say, so-and-so might need some additional support. And then they can also talk about those topics, and it's in real time. So that if something comes up, they can stop and they can make sure they're addressing some things. They're going to work with the counselors, and we might pull in somebody like Melissa Durest or a 504 counselor. And so there's so many more resources now that we are fully staffed. And also, I think the idea of, it's more of a team approach because we have those additional bodies, so to speak. And again, I think the staff and the students know that there's not just one person that they might see if they need help, but there's there's a plethora of people that are here to help them. And I think our 8th graders had huge gains. The 8th grade team especially has really worked on creating very similar expectations. And also again, during their team meetings, the middle school, they collaborate, almost hour by hour in some cases. And when they meet, again, they can help share information with the counselors or myself, or I might go in to see them. So, I mean, it's been a wonderful progression with kids. I know we have some bumps along the line, but sometimes even if you look at the categories of disrespect and defiance, they can kind of be similar depending on whose interpretation are they, and depending on what exactly the situation is. So, yeah, so that's kind of a wrap round. I know we had a situation with our 8th graders last week, kind of not being nice with each other, and the team got together, and the Mrs. Harding, the 8th grade science teacher, spent each of her periods a portion of that really trying to address the let's revisit how to be nice to each other with specifics, and knock on wood, it's been a great week thus far.
Awesome. So our next steps to continue the stuff that Rachel and Kim were talking about, in addition to the things up here, actually, I'll do this first. We started the year with some specific class meetings with each grade level, and we paired them up. So we had 6th and 7th grade, 6th grade, 7th and 8th grade, 9th and 10th, 11th and 12th. And we brought in those first rounds of meetings, in addition to talking about welcome back, we started out by laying some norms for the year and having conversations about how things can look, and hopefully getting people to think through that positive mindset. The second round, we invited in the police chief and the fire chief, and the police chief ended up coming and helping with some safety conversations. We've really been focusing this year on more lockdowns and trying to get even more of that kind of focus. And then we also, again, revisited how can we be a positive community? Let's think about what we do and how it affects the school and others. So we are planning a next meeting in January as what we call kind of a booster shot for what those norms can look like. After the vacation, and as we tip into the second half of the year, things can start to slack. So kind of pulling that back. So that's one thing that we are planning already for the beginning of the year to keep the focus on moving forward. As Kim alluded to, that we have some plans already starting to formulate on our counseling team to do some of that classroom guidance and extend it into grades 8 through 12 more as we start to see some of those areas pop up. And I can't say enough, again, we made some shifts working with student services, looking at our access program, thinking about MTSS-B and kind of getting that 6th and 7th grade specific counselor, as well as our school adjustment counselor, Melissa Jurest. Those positions, I think, were well shifted and have had a huge impact and have allowed more of that proactive kind of approach to take place. I can't speak highly enough for the work that Melissa's been doing in the school adjustment world, as well as how the counseling world has shifted to continue to support that. So that's huge, and they have plans to continue that going into the spring. Our teachers this year, coming into the year, we did a lot of professional learning with them and conversations around how to set classroom norms and expectations, framing dialogues when there is a difficult situation with a learner, tools that they can use in the classroom. I didn't show this data point, but our teacher managed behaviors are actually up quite a bit in some categories, but that's a good thing. What that means is our teachers are feeling like they have the resources to head those things off, address them with the learners, and have conversations quicker to intervene and prevent them from becoming more serious problems. And we do have plans in the spring to continue that focus on professional learning and allowing our teachers the room to discuss and analyze how they might continue to work with learners specifically. And then we've started to plan a couple of school-wide assemblies. We haven't been able to do this in a number of years due to COVID, but finding some really positive speakers or messages that resonate well with our learners and having them come in to support JRMS and CHS specific assemblies. Those are on the docket coming up in the winter and spring as well. Another piece that's not up here, but that I want to kind of close with, because I think it encapsulates the energy we're trying to build and the work that has been done to support that energy. We have 2 student leadership groups that have started to really form and grow. One of them is calling itself the WOW Committee, and it's currently comprised of about 30 high schoolers, with the goal of including some middle schoolers as the work gets going. They've designed bathroom redesign projects around the building. And last time their excitement about doing this talking about bathrooms, which isn't usually exciting in this building. They have all these really cool plans to grow positive energy and make those spaces more safe and feel better for each other. They've adopted a lot of pet projects, murals, redesigning how the entries look, things like that. And those are student-led initiatives to make their school feel even more positive and exciting for them. So that group is continuing to grow and is really starting to move, with the goal of having some work on the ground in January. And then we've been seeing another group of student leaders coming forward, wanting to do some recognition, some peer kind of interventions with each other, and thinking about how mentoring between learners could help to improve the climate and culture of their school building. They don't have a name yet, but our first meeting is coming up in the next week or so during the mentoring timeframe to help get them going. And those two examples capture the spirit that we're trying to build. And I think learners are starting to feel that energy more and more focused around positive stuff as well as we get back to a sense of the new normal. And it's because of a lot of the work we've described. So our next steps include making that continue to be the norm with that positive student voice, kids wanting to make their school feel safer, have more exciting opportunities, and these other pieces will just continue to get us there. So that's it. That's our first trimester update. Do you have any questions?
I don't think so.
Okay. Well, we'll be back in the spring after we've done we'll do our wintertime interim assessments for SAS. And then in the March timeframe, we'll do our springtime PSAT assessing. So we'll sometime after March or April timeframe, we'll come back and do another update on how things have been going before the end of the year. And otherwise, we very much appreciate the chance to share out. I think our next agenda for January had some elementary school components, as well as it might be another MTSS-B update, but I'll make sure that gets out to the committee well before then as well. So.
Okay,
All right.
then we are all done if nobody else has anything.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you.